The history of Bucharest starts right here. So where this late 1500s, 1600s, early 1600s monastery now is the site along where the Danube River was, that in Paleolithic times, many 40s to 10,000 years ago into prehistory, people settled right here. They even found some archaeological evidence stretching back maybe hundreds of thousands of years, I read somewhere, with people that were hybrid human and Neanderthal. So Bucharest, long before becoming a big city, was a thick forest with many settlements along the river, which still is over there, but now is heavily built up, reclaimed land. The riverfront used to be right here. Romania as a whole, though, has a long human habitation. The second oldest European human remains were found in northeast Romania, dated to about 40,000 years old. So an ancient culture existed in the area of Bucharest, right on this spot, that became a people group all around Romania. There were tribes that were collectively described by as Getae by the ancient Greeks, people north of the Danube River. Romans later called them Daci. They observed them calling themselves that, so Dacians is what stuck. So this site right here, where this monastery was, has shown to have archaeological evidence to be inhabited, at least temporarily, many tens of thousands of years. Right on this spot. It was a small settlement, hunter-gatherers, maybe a little bit of farming. Not a lot is known. But permanent settlements, evidence, has been found on this spot starting around 1800 BC. In the wide area of modern huge city Bucharest, there's actually 6 different Dacian settlements and villages that have been unearthed doing modern constructions inside the boundaries of the metro area. They had trade with the Greeks and Romans, as Greek and Roman coins were found in the remains of these ancient Dacian sites. So let's talk about the Dacians. Dacian tribes inhabited all of present-day Romania, Moldova, parts of Ukraine, North Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia, and some in southern Poland. They're kind of like the cousins of the Thracians, who were a little bit more south of here in Bulgaria area. They were influenced by nomadic Scythian people, who are steppe horsemen that came into the region. Little info about the Scythians. 9000 BC, they moved from their origins in the Iran Caucasus area, present-day Iran Caucasus, to Ukraine, and then southern Russia, and then to here, about 700 BC, assimilating with the Dacian population. Also in 500 BC, the Celtics, who are a crazy story in itself, who stretched all the way from Ireland all the way to over here, mixed in with the Dacian tribes also. In 440 BC, the Dacians actually, who were caught up in the Achaemenid Persian Empire expansion, while the Persians were trying to invade the Scythians that were around here, they ran into the Dacians, and the Dacians actually handed the Persian army some heavy losses. They didn't expect the Dacians to be in the way when they were coming to conquer the Scythians. And 350s BC, Alexander the Great attacked the Dacians as well, to some success from Macedonia. But Dacian culture and religion lived on, the Dacians. Let's talk about a little bit of their culture and religion long before this place happened. So, okay. Dacian culture and religion worshipped priests, kings, and believed people were immortal. Death was a change of country of sorts for the soul. The little security guard told me to keep down. I know I'm a little loud, excuse me. He's at active church right now. Dacians worship the sun and spirit world. Zalmoxis was the main god of thunder and lightning. Another like the god of the moon, hunting, and human health were other deities. Some of their cults were even spread into ancient Greece. One, being so popular, it became an official holiday festival in Athens around 400 BC, a Dacian god cult, way before these times of Christianity. So, Greek historian Strabo wrote of a Dacian priest king traveling south all the way to Egypt on a religious spiritual journey around 500 BC, learning about every culture and religion all the way. So the Dacians were all over Romania, including here, not just Bucharest only, but it was a collective tribe of people. The Dacian religion actually was still practiced long into the Christian time, till about 500 AD here, before they were Christianized. So let's get into more Dacian history that is known. A powerful Dacian kingdom was formed in 168 BC that ended up having near the same boundaries of modern-day Romania. It lasted till about 106 AD, actually, give or take, with the capital not here, but near present-day Transylvania. A powerful king, Bucharest, a contemporary of Julius Caesar, expanded the territory and expelled the Celts that had been here for a long time. They've been living here a few hundred years. Caesar saw this strength gathering of this Dacian people and formulated tribes to conquer the threat. The tower here. None of this stuff was here, obviously, during the times I'm talking about. But it was on these grounds where this stuff happened. Old graves. So Julius Caesar had some battles with the Dacians, trying to get into the territory. King Bucharest of the Dacians, though, was internally killed, and Dacian was split into 4 parts, weakening the kingdom in 44 BC. One of those fractions of Dacians even made alliances with Rome, intermarrying with Roman emperors' daughters. There was still a sizable Dacian kingdom, though, with Roman areas on the periphery to the south and west, which continued to pose a threat to Rome. Dacians continued to pose a threat to Rome, and also was tempting because of the vast riches of gold in the Dacian homeland. In 85 BC, the Dacians, before this breakup, were reunited once again, briefly. In the 80s BC, 85 AD. The Dacians were reunited once again. 80s AD, there were many battles with the Dacians and Romans, which went both ways. Dacians were strong, fierce warriors. Remember, they fought off the Persians and fought with Alexander the Great in the past before this. They were a feared people, a wild people, barbarians, it's thought by the Roman and Greek world. But by 105 AD, Emperor Trajan's legions finally conquered the capital in present-day Transylvania and much of modern Romania. Not here, though. But Bucharest actually remained fighting off the Romans, the Bucharest area, the settlements here, and there was something called Free Dacians, never conquered by Rome. Anyways, the Emperor Trajan of the Roman Empire, after his largest Dacian victory of finally defeating the Dacians, had the biggest celebration ever in Rome. He had the Trajan's column built with depictions and artwork of the Dacian kingdom and its victory in 105 AD. But remember, this spot remained Free Dacians, the tribes that were settled here, never conquered by Rome in Bucharest. Trajan's column and gold, and they had a big festivity in Rome, though, for the areas that they conquered. Oh, wow, this looks like some old carvings that come from these times, maybe. So the province of Roman Dacia lasted until about 271 AD. Romans intermixed with the Dacian people, and this is where the origins of Romanian culture come from, which is why this is a Latin place to this day. the Dacian and Roman intermixing is the basis for the modern day Romania. So not like Slav cultures all around them, migrations of them came through the area. There were some Slav settlements, small settlements around area Bucharest, they think, but not a lot is known about this time. But not a lot is known about this time here. But in Roman Dacia, a lot is known, and that's why they call it Romania to this day, from the Roman Empire. So Goths and Caprice raiders, barbarians, came in from the north and east respectively in 271 and took over Roman Dacia. Roman aristocracy fled, and it was the first ever Roman province to be abandoned. I'll get into more of the Roman history at a later date in other areas of Romania in the future, but here, once again, was never the Roman Empire. It was free Dacia. Not a lot is known, but they did in the 330s AD. Constantine's Byzantine Eastern Roman legions came in here, briefly ruled. They found some coins in this area of Constantine's excavations, and the entirety, though, of the Dacia area was abandoned by Rome completely by the 330s AD, and the next part of the history we'll get into next. Alright, just a little tangent real quick. So this is where the river is now. About a 10-minute walk, 5-minute walk from where it was. It's been heavily diverted and urbanized, as you can see, especially probably in the last 200 years. But look at this huge city now. Probably far cry from the humble little settlements here in the forest that were once here, Dacians, and the 100 BC to 100 AD fort that was in the spot of that monastery. And it's amazing how things change over time sometimes. Yes, here's where the river is now. Not far from where it was. The original, many tens of thousands of years or more, settlements of Bucharest. Alright, on the site of the oldest church in Bucharest and Old Town, let's get into the Bucharest history, city history. So, we last left off with the Romans leaving the Dacian kingdoms and peoples kind of dealing with some barbarians coming in like the Visigoths. Around the 500s AD, the Slavs started their mass migration all over from what I believe their base was in Ukraine, Poland area. Not a lot is known about that, but they went west, south, and east. And they came through here, but they knew, well, partially part of Romania was mountainous. The coast was Byzantine influence, Byzantine Empire, so they stayed away from that area. They stayed away from the mountains. There were some small Slav temporary settlements around this area, the Wallachian Plains, but not really that many. It didn't have a big impact on the area. They mostly kept going south into the Balkans, what is now former states of Yugoslavia. But steppe peoples were also coming in through here, like the Huns and the Avars were pillaging through the region, messing with the local people, but they never could actually conquer. The Huns being part of the people that ended up creating Hungary with the Magyars, a little bit to the west of here, northwest. And the Avars went down into the Croatia area and Bulgaria, causing a bunch of problems for a while. Also ended up stopping through here, but not fully conquering the area. So, many Dacian and Romans, the previous couple hundred years of history, people were still around here. It's not like they migrated somewhere else or some other thing happened. But just not a lot is known about this time. Because the people, through all these different barbaric tribes and Slavs and different things going on. Most of them hid in the Carpathian Mountains and settlements, keeping their language and culture intact in this era of a power vacuum after the Roman Empire retreated. Especially in the times who came around next were the Bulgars. So the Bulgars were originally from the Central Asia region. They moved on to the Ukraine and this kind of region that established the first Bulgarian Empire. The Bulgars, 681, moved into here with their conquered Slav subjects, and they moved with them. So technically this region was part of the Bulgars, but they didn't really settle the city. The empire, actually, of the first Bulgarian Empire, second, if you think about it, kingdom, was all of the Balkans until at one point in the 800s AD, until it diminished in size in the 1018 AD because of fights with the Byzantine Empire. So all this time, the Romanians, pre-Romanians, were mostly in the Carpathian Mountains and keeping their Latin culture and roots intact as all these things were going on around them. The Byzantines did do some trade with this area because there was coins excavated in the Bucharest region, but still, Bucharest was still mostly forested. None of this city or anything was here just yet. We're getting to that soon. The Bulgarians were forcibly moved south with their defeats with the Byzantines. In 1185 AD, the Bulgarians gained their independence. Again, the Bulgar kingdom, which was established as a new country below the Danube River to the near current Bulgaria borders. So that ended up that time. So no doubt, though, through all these centuries that are mysterious, there was mixing with many different people groups that came through here with the traces with the Roman and Dacian history and past. You know, there's no doubt that this kind of thing happened. It's in the DNA of the local people. But still, that Roman Dacian mix is what constitutes the modern Romanian. So after the Bulgarians left, and the other Slavs also left, in the 1100s, the Proto-Romanian societies began dispersing and going into regions out of the mountains and out of the forests into valleys and rivers like here. Not a lot is known about this time except for Turkic peoples were raiding the area, and in 1241 the Mongols came in, Mongol Empire, which the Proto-Romanians weren't really documented in this time, but that was from other sources, mostly Chinese sources about the different raiders that were here, and Byzantine. So despite their Western Roman Catholic past, though, the Romanian Orthodoxy Christianity began to dominate the people's faith around here. Probably influenced by the Bulgarian times, I'm thinking. So although there were Catholic, Jewish, and other Orthodox communities of different types, the Greek Orthodox, Bulgarian Orthodox. So after the Mongol retreat of the area, this whole region was disputed between the southern Bulgarians and the western Magyars, who, with the Huns, eventually established Hungary. So the region of the city, since the retreat of the 330s AD Constantine Romans, never really settled on other people extensively. So this was just a huge force. A lot of Romanian culture that survives today comes from the Transylvania region, where they were in the Carpathian Mountains from all these turbulent times. So, now to Middle Ages and the start of the city and the Romanian people. So, two Romanian principalities start up in the late 1200s. The central and southern Wallachia, which is right here, in 1290, by a guy from Transylvania who moved south and secured its independence from Hungary finally in 1330 AD. And then in the 1300s, the northwestern and parts of mountainous area was called Moldova. which included Transylvania, I believe, at the time, which was nominally connected with Hungary, I believe, at some point. So this was kind of a hard thing to fathom, but Moldova and Transylvania at one point, I believe in the 1200s, 1300s, split into two. So there's three main Romanian kingdoms: Transylvania, which is in the northwest, Moldova, northeast, and south here, which is Wallachia. So around this time, it's believed that Bucharest, in the Wallachian plains, has it. Legend is that a shepherd named Bucharest, he brought his flock of sheep down to the river here, where we were earlier, central city, and settled the area. Bucharest city was first mentioned in 1370 by a Wallachian prince. The capital of Wallachia was a different city, and another one that still exists today, Târgoviște, in the 12 to 1400s. But in the late 1300s, though, around when it was first mentioned, it began to gain importance. The Hungary kingdom often had influence of North Romania, Moldavia, and Transylvania, and the Ottomans, the Muslim Turks, began pressuring Wallachia here as early as the 1380s. The city itself experienced many times of violence over the centuries, instigated by the Ottomans and the Moldovans and Hungarians and Wallachians, all caught up in the middle, in the principalities and leadership, changing allegiances and sides. And it was just, researching this was crazy, man. There was like so many sacks of the city and burning down of things, and yeah, there's some major pollution right now. Woo! Peace to all the people that suffered through those times. It must have been very confusing with so many different alliances changing. So the Ottomans in Hungary, I believe, really never conquered Wallachia or Moldavia, or as much as demanded tribute as like puppet governments, or they installed like certain governments. I don't know exactly what happened. I tried to research it. It's hard to say. Most people just leave it out, like, oh, it was Wallachia. The Ottoman Empire, though, had a lot of influence. But unlike Bulgaria and Bosnia and Serbia, for example, which were areas where Turks moved in and mosques were built and the culture was really changed, the Wallachian people kind of stayed strong, and, they're kind of semi-independent in a way, I believe. Like, it wasn't totally Islamicized here. Mosques weren't built and a bunch of other stuff wasn't happening like that. Like in Bulgaria, for example, many churches were transitioned into mosques and there was no autonomy. It was a different situation here. A vassal state system with often a loyal leadership that worked with the Turk overseers. But there was constant rebellions, of course. So this area that I'm talking about with the Wallachia, Moldovan, Transylvania, royal loyalty, switching sides, going back and forth with the Ottomans, sometimes not, sometimes feuding with each other, sometimes going to this side, sometimes working the Hungarians. It's all very confusing, man. Bucharest, though, here in Wallachia, had brief independence 3 times between 1448 and 1476, led by Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad Dracula, who defeated the Turk in battles 3 different times, liberating the city in Wallachia independently 3 times. The Ottomans, unfortunately, always took it back, but right over there, he built his palace in 1459 during one of these independent states. Bucharest was shared as the capital of Wallachia with Timisoara many times. It was like the summer capital. Now it's the winter capital. They would switch it off. But again, lots of violence on these streets in this area. 1476, 1551, 1554. There were many sacks and resacks of the city by different factions, some aligned with the Ottomans, some not. 1541 to 1716, Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania were at times Ottoman vassals, sometimes they weren't. This is all very confusing. I can't get the total story. Someone who's Romanian, please explain it to me. But this is how it was here. Especially after the Ottomans defeated and dissolved the Hungarian kingdom in 1521. It's when they started really gaining power. Despite all the violence during this time, though, Bucharest became very populous. All these different things happened on, started becoming building up as we see it today. This is the old town that started growing at this time. 1500s, 1600s. A lot of churches around here are built around this time, including this one right here, 1559. Like there was a couple interesting things that happened. 1594 and 1655, there were mass attacks in the city by different factions. Like one interesting one, that was a takeover by a Balkan mercenary army led by Serbian troops that came in here and they just wanted to retake the Christian stronghold away from the Turks or something. I don't know, man. A lot of violence. So, but yet again, the Ottomans and their allies often just retook the city over and over. Each time in all these years of violence, the city was very badly damaged. Many citizens were killed. All this back and forth over the centuries. It must have been very hectic to live here. It is why there are few historic buildings left to this day. After 1655, though, the Wallachian princes enjoyed a time of peace until about 1716. Still a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, often, in a way. You look at maps of the Ottoman Empire and it kind of, like year by year maps. I love these on YouTube, by the way. They go, like, moves up in this area, moves down, moves up, moves down. It's kind of crazy. But it was still a vassal. There were some spats of bad famines and bubonic plague in this era, though, in the 1600s, 1700s. And at times, even Wallachia, Moldova, and Transylvania were like kind of united together, even though Transylvania was Hungarian. Anyways, Bucharest. Let's go into the modern era in the next spot. Okay, in true Romanian fashion of spookiness, the House of Parliament back there is engulfed in fog. And I have some music too. So let's get into the more modern time of Bucharest in Romania. 1716 to 1866, after the time of strange Ottoman alliances, non-alliances in Hungary with Wallachia, Moldova, Transylvania. This was another confusing time for the city and the area down here. There was a lot of war with the Christian coalition versus Turks, Austrians versus Turks, Russians versus Turks, and every one of them fighting against each other in a big, confusing shift of alliances that changed all the time. Sometimes the Wallachian princes liked the Ottomans, sometimes they didn't, sometimes they liked the Russians, sometimes they didn't, sometimes the Austrians. It was very confusing. I tried my best to figure it out. Maybe a Romanian person that watches this can help me with that time. Anyway, so we're getting into the 1866 time. Romania was caught in the middle of all these great powers. And as naturally a crossroads between East, Central, and Southern Europe, many plagues at this time ravaged the city, along with the battles that took place here with the Russians, Ottomans, Austrian, Hungary, all at different times occupying the city. During all this time, though, the semi-independent city-state and kingdom of Wallachia had great progress in arts, building, culture, nationalism, including a lot of basis of a lot of what you see today in modern Bucharest. The 1848 revolution, backtrack a little bit, fervor, kind of like the Arab Spring situation in the early 2000s, which influenced by the French Revolution a few decades earlier, spread all over Europe, even catching fire here for Romanian independence from the different influences. In 1859, an edict unified the old two Romanian principalities, Wallachia and Moldova, with Transylvania still being a part of Hungary, Austria-Hungary. making the capital Bucharest. That was the first time in 1866 that this was made the capital of both the Romanian Wallachia and Moldavia, the new Romanian state. A coup in the city in 1866 actually killed many of the Turks and their Wallachian Turk friends on these grounds in that revolt of time for Romanian independence. Back to the music. In 1877 to 78, during the Russian-Turkish War, it liberated Romania, at least those two parts, Wallachia and Moldavia, from the Ottoman control forever. In 1881, Bucharest and Romania was independent for once. Building projects and expansion of the city increased with international investment, especially from France. They had a real close relationship with France and their other Latin neighbors. Remember, Romania, even being in Eastern Europe area, because of their Roman roots from centuries earlier that I talked about, have more in common with Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian over any of their neighbors, which is very interesting. Language has more of a similarity to Latin languages. So there was a lot of investment by Western powers, late 1800s. France built up a lot of buildings. You know, I think some of these buildings are newer, but it's the first time it became a big city, and it was the first time it was independent ever. But then, Merry Christmas, everybody! Big Christmas market going on. At the time, yes, heavily Eastern Orthodox. Still, but interestingly, being a Latin country, which is kind of opposite. Latin is usually Roman Catholic, and fascinating place, one of a kind. But of course, World War I started 19 teens. Romania at first declared neutrality, but then joined the Allies in 1916 at urge of France to regain the Transylvania part of Romania, which was part of Austria-Hungary, which would reunify the country for the first time since the BC era, during the Dacian times, which is crazy to think about. The Central Powers battered Romania with many casualties, though. It was a tough one, especially Germany coming into Romania. Many Romanians perished and were injured, casualties. It's a sad time for Romania, and it's raining for those sad times. Now, a little bit of rain. Germany actually forced Bucharest and Romania to sign a peace treaty to end this part of the World War I, and the things were actually looking good for the Central Powers during World War I during that time. Until some ground was gained by France and America joined the war and turned the tide of World War I. By the end of the war, Russian and Austria-Hungary, by the end of the war with Germany and Austria-Hungary and Ottoman empires, with the Allies winning, the Austrian-Hungary and Ottoman empires were dissolved. And Romania established their near modern borders, including Transylvania for the first time almost ever from 1918 to 1940. December 1st, 1918 was the first time Romania was a united kingdom since the last Dacian kingdom before its breakup in 44 BC, 1,974 years. Maybe including another time where there was a couple hundred years after that, or about 100 years after that, there was another powerful Dacian king that fought Romans. But regardless, we're talking around 2,000 years since those three regions were connected. 1918 it finally happened. So World War II broke out after the pre-war years, which was also hard for Romania. And it once again was caught in the... Let's get away from people when I talk about World War II, it's always controversial. Let's get closer to the power. Romania was once again caught between all the powers they're surrounded by. And they joined the Axis and the Nazis and Italians. For the reason is, a lot of people don't know this. At first, the Soviets were kind of aligned in 1940 with the Nazis. They both had agreements before Hitler attacked Russia. So since Romania was kind of thankful for the Russians for freeing them from the Turkish almost 100 years earlier, 50 to 100 years, they sided with Russia, but then once they were with the Nazi side, Axis side, it was too late. Romania was actually one of the biggest sources of oil to the Nazi war machine. So Nazi Germany did not want to let them go. The cities, sadly, 400,000 Jewish in Romania, including in the city, were sent to concentration camps. And there was a close by to here Jewish neighborhood that was almost completely abandoned. 1944, the US and UK bombed Bucharest. Not that heavily though. A lot got damaged, but compared to other places like in Germany where the whole cities were leveled. Still a sad time for the city. A lot of civilians died. A coup took place against the leadership in 1944. This enraged the Nazis because the coup took over the puppet Romanian government and switched the side to the Allies as the tide was turning in World War II. 1944, the Soviet army entered the city, and in 1945, Soviet Communist Party seized control and hegemony to the Eastern Bloc Romania at the end of World War II. Soviets were a little weary, though, of Romania because many of their troops at a lot of times were fighting against them in the war after Russia switched sides. Again, a confusing and terrible time. The Eastern Front was especially brutal in World War II. So they kept USSR troops in the city and the country. The USSR actually drained a lot of the country's economy until 1958 really badly, kind of controlling everything they did. So, just a statement here. I do not feel like I'm an authority to speak on any Eastern Bloc countries or governments or the exact politics of what were going on. One, because I didn't live through it, and two, there's a lot of bias and spin out there on anything related to communism during Cold War times. You research, you read a bunch of different aspects of things. This is what I got. So, one man ruled as dictator during this time of socialist, communist Romania. Most businesses were nationalized, and there was a lot of suspicious elections and back and forth between pro or anti-Soviet fervor. Plus collectivization, agricultural programs, workers' wages were hiked though in an effort to change the economy, especially though in 1947 and 1965 there were many protests and uprisings where hundreds and even thousands of cases of abuse, death, torture of political opponents and citizens happened in the city. So many thousands were sent to gulags and other forced migrations during this early communist socialist time. After years of Soviet meddling though, by 1958 Romania lessened their ties and became more independent, kind of siding with China actually more. So a new dictator came to power at the first one's death in 1965. He ruled the country and the city till 1989. He's the one who built this as a government center of maybe his home palace. He was a pretty rough dictator, one of the worst in all the Eastern Bloc era. Little to anyone had any control over what he wanted to do. Had a bunch of yes men. A lot of people here lived during these. So, though they were the only Warsaw Pact nation to condemn the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. They had a lot of pro-birth policies to grow the population. Industrialization increased, and there was some economic growth, though, with the good school systems created. It wasn't all bad. 1977, a devastating earthquake damaged a lot of the city, and instead of rebuilding, they wanted to do demolition for building projects such as this area. This is the Grandiose Civic Center, which was like kind of crazy because they demolished a bunch of historic stuff, but it's this boulevard that stretches all the way down that way and ends up at the Parliament right here. So that was completed in the 1980s. Oh, a metro line was built in 1974. It was nice. I wrote it earlier. So they made this Grandiose Palace, one of the heaviest buildings in the world, and the government finally finished it in 1984. It's actually still not complete though. They're still working on these buildings. In the 1980s though, the dictator became very suspicious, and a lot of wiretapping of citizens was going on. The leader posted pictures of himself everywhere. I think they call that a cult personality, I read. And paranoia increased amongst all the citizens. A lot of people were informants. You know, I just living in that kind of society. Whew, feel for it. 1987 to 89 though, the citizens were done with it. Riots led to a bloody Romanian revolution where thousands were killed in the city, supporting both sides. The dictator and his wife were ultimately executed, I think close to here. Either hung or firing squad when they were trying to escape. The country and city transitioned into a free market after that. After 1989, ended up joining the European Union, NATO, and is looked at as a buffer zone between Russia and Ukraine and Western Europe. A lot of leaderships, though, were previous Communist Party members, so that's kind of weird, but they took over. This is the House of Parliament now, in a democratic government that exists to this day, from 1989 to 2019. That's the history of Romania, Bucharest.